Hello, welcome back to my channel and welcome to this week's video, which is the mid-year book tag. So I'm basically gonna be answering 13 questions, I think, that are in this book tag, and that will talk about some of the books that I've read in this first half of the year, or, I mean, technically it's a bit more than the first half of the year, but the first question is, what's the best book you've read so far in 2024? And actually, I'm gonna tell you about the second best book because the actual best book is the answer to another question, and I don't want to just answer the same thing twice. And this was still a book I gave 5 stars to, and it was A History of Wild Places. And I actually just read this book because it was chosen by like a random number generator, so I probably wouldn't have read this book anytime soon if it wasn't for that. And this was kind of like general fiction, kind of a thriller. And we start by following Travis, and he has like a gift for finding people. He just needs like an object that used to belong to them, and then he can't find the people he's looking for. And so he's tasked with finding Maggie, who was an author that had gone missing. And he is like following her leads, and he gets to like a community in the middle of the woods that's called Pastoral. And it was actually like that community was supposed to be just a myth, but apparently it exists, and that is where Maggie went missing. And that's also where Travis goes missing. And then a few years later, we start following 3 characters from Pastoral, like characters that live there. And they are Theo, Kala, and B, I think. And they, like I said, they live there. They have always lived there because no one can get in or out of Pastoral because they are afraid of a disease that is like on the outside that they call the rot. So, like I said, no one can get in or out, but they do find signs of Travis and Maggie. They don't find them, but they find like things that belong to them. And there are definitely a lot of secrets in that community, and people might not be as safe as they think. And I absolutely loved the vibe and the atmosphere of this book. It was really, really creepy, and it was very unsettling like the whole time we were in Pastoral. And for some time, like we didn't even know what was real and what wasn't. And I did have a theory that like it turned out to be right, but there were other like reveals, other twists that happened that I did not see coming and were pretty shocking. And yeah, I love the vibe, the atmosphere of this book. It was definitely my kind of book, and I really, really loved it. And now the second question is, what's the best sequel you read so far in 2024? And this, like the best sequel is actually the best book. So that is why I answered another book, and that was Tiamat's Wrath, which is book 8 in the Expanse series, which is a sci-fi series. And this is set like many years in the future in our world, and like in this time, humans are living in like many other planets. They have spread throughout the world, and there are always like 2 main plot lines happening in these books. There's always like a more like political plots, and there's also a plot that is connected to like a biological threat. And definitely hard to talk about this without spoiling because this is the 8th and the book before last in the series. And yeah, like I said, it's hard to talk about, but basically there was like a big conflict in book 7, and this book deals with the aftermath of that huge conflict. And honestly, like everyone was absolutely miserable, absolutely just suffering the whole time in this book, including me, because I love these characters so much. But I feel like I was able to connect to them even more in this book, and I loved it. And I loved both of the plot lines that were happening. I was so invested. I wasn't bored for a single second. There was time to connect with the characters, but it was also like fast paced, and there were like fights in space which are amazing, and the like biological thing was also insane. And I just love this book so much. Like I have absolutely no complaints about it. And yeah, definitely the best sequel and the best book I've read this year so far. Next question is a new release you haven't read yet but want to. And honestly, there are many because I have a list of like 20 releases, 20 new releases for this year that I wanted to read. And I'm very behind on that. Like, there are already 9 books out of that list that I haven't read. Like, some of them I have read. I think I've read 4 possibly, but there are 9 currently out, published, that I haven't read yet, but I'm gonna tell you about the 2 that I might be the most excited for, and that is Alien Clay and Mirrored Heavens. And so Alien Clay is a sci-fi book, and I'm very excited to read that one because it is from an author that I gave 5 stars to, a trilogy that I read like from him. Like, I absolutely loved it. It was insane. It was like mind-blowing, honestly, and I really loved it, so I'm very excited to read this one. And in this one, there's a planet, there's like a prison, and one of the prisoners is a professor of xenoecology, I think. And he discovers that humans weren't the first like intelligent life to live on their planet. And basically now they're gonna like figure out who was there before and why they left. The answers to those questions might change everything for the planet and for humanity. And then Mirrored Heavens is a fantasy book, and it's the last book in a trilogy. And I'm very excited to read it because I really liked both the previous books. And so this, honestly, this one is hard to talk about because it's very confusing to explain without spoiling, but the story starts in the city of Tova, and there's like a rare celestial event that happens that a sun priest said would mean like the unbalancing of the world. And we follow a captain of a ship who's called Ziala. I'm not entirely sure how you say her name, but it's Xiala. And she's actually my favorite character. Like, I absolutely love her. And she's transporting a very intriguing, kind of creepy passenger who's called Serapio. And like their whole world is changing because, like I said, it was like that celestial event meant the unbalancing of the world, and it's definitely unbalanced. And I love the 2 first books for different reasons. Like, in the first one, I really liked the plot and like getting to know the world and the magic. It was really, really cool. And the second was more like character focus and also focus like on the politics, which I also thought was really interesting. And the end of the second book definitely got me very, very excited for the third and last. So yeah, very excited to read that one as well. Then the next question is, what's the most anticipated release for the second half of 2024? Again, I have that list. There are a few that still haven't come out, but I, once again, am going to tell you about the 2 I'm most excited for. And the first one is The Mercy of Gods, which is going to be the first book in a sci-fi series. And the reason why I'm very excited for that one, it's because it's written by the same authors that wrote the Expanse series. And obviously, I really, really love this series, so I'm very excited to see what they're writing next. And in the series, humanity is living like on another planet, not Earth, but no one really knows like how they got there. And then there are the Carricks, who have been waging war and conquests like all over the galaxy, and they are facing a new enemy and they might need humanity's help. And there is a character who's a scientist who might be like the guardian or the betrayer of humanity. And I mean, that does sound very intriguing, but like I said, the main reason why I want to read this is because it's the same authors of The Expanse. Like, I added this to my list without even knowing what it was about. And then the other book is Ghostsmith, and this is the second book in the House of the Dead, I think, duology, which is fantasy. And in the series, we follow Ren, who is a bonesmith, and she wants to become a Valkyr, who are like warriors, like very specialized warriors. And in the beginning of the first book, she like tries to become a Valkyr, but she does not pass her trials. And so she goes like to the wall that separates them from the breach. And she basically wants to prove herself. And she learns that the prince has been kidnapped. And so she's gonna try to get him back because, like I said, she wants to prove herself. And in doing so, she has to work with an ironsmith. And ironsmiths and bonesmiths are historically not friends, and they discover like some things that should not exist, like beyond the wall, and some magic that also kind of should not exist, and like some people that should not exist. And I really, really love that book. I also didn't hate the romance, which is shocking to me. And it was actually my last 5-star of 2023, so I'm obviously very excited to read the sequel. Then, what was my biggest disappointment? And so that was Ghost Station, and that was actually one of the few anticipated releases that I have gotten to. And yeah, it was one of my anticipated releases. Like, I expected to love it because I have read another book from this author, which was also horror and sci-fi, because that's what this was, and absolutely loved it. So I was expecting to love this one, but I definitely didn't. And we're following Ophelia, who was a psychologist, and she was a specialist on ERS, which is a space-based condition that has resulted in like many murders because it makes people very violent. And she like is assigned to an exploratory team who are going out to like explore a new planet, and they don't really want her there, but she's still like determined to help. And some like weird things start happening, and like she's wondering if she herself has ERS. And honestly, like for the longest time I was like, what even is the plot of this book? Because nothing was happening. Like there were a few creepy moments, but they were like very easily explained like what was actually happening. So it wasn't really even that scary, and it never really got that scary. It felt more like a thriller, a not very thrilling thriller than a horror book. And also there was something that was in the synopsis that only happened like 60% into the book. And at that point, like I would consider it a spoiler, but also nothing really happened before that point. Also, I guess that was kind of needed in the synopsis to like, sell the book, because there was really nothing to say before that. And yeah, I also didn't really like the main character, so it was definitely my biggest disappointment this year. Then, what was my biggest surprise? And there was like a smaller surprise, which was Mistborn Era 2, because overall, like it has definitely not the highest ratings, especially compared to Era 1 of the Mistborn series. So I was unsure how I was gonna feel about it, but I definitely like really, really enjoyed it. I didn't love it like as much as Era 1, but I still really, really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with those books. I also suffered a lot with those books. And yeah, that was definitely a pleasant surprise. But the biggest surprise, I think, would have to be Wolfsong, which I read for my romance video. And I do not like romance, so I was not expecting to really like it that much. But this book was like about a lot more than just a romance, and I ended up really liking it. I really, really love the main character, so I definitely was like, I cared about him and what happened to him, and I definitely like connected, and I ended up really, really enjoying this book, and that was very surprising. Then a new favorite author, and honestly, for fantasy and for sci-fi, I haven't really read like that many new authors, and the ones I did weren't like my favorite books ever. But where I have read new authors was like thrillers and mysteries, and I do have two authors that I have really enjoyed, and one of them is Chris Carter with the Robert Hunter series, which I am like currently reading. I have read the first 3 books and the prequel, and I really like it. It's very violent, very gory, and very descriptive, and honestly kind of disturbing. So if that's not your thing, I don't recommend. If that is your thing, I definitely recommend. So I really like how he just writes those descriptive, terrifying, horrifying scenes. And another author that I read for like mysteries, thrillers, was Holly Jackson, and that was a very different vibe because that was YA. And I read the Good Girls Guide to Murder series, and I also really, really liked it. Again, for definitely different reasons, but I really like the main character, and I really like the mystery as well, and the plot. And I definitely want to read more from that author. But yeah, I really like those two. Then newest fictional crush. So I don't really have one for this year, and honestly, this is always a hard question for me, and usually I don't really like have a crush on a book character, but this time I do have one from like November of last year, which I obviously did not talk about in this video last year. And like that was the first book where they appeared, but then they appeared in more books that I read this year. So I'm going with it, and that is Manon from the Throne of Glass series. I absolutely love her. She is an icon. She is everything to me, and I love her. Then is newest favorite character. And with this one, I think I'm gonna go with Wayne from Mistborn Era 2 because I love him. He's so funny and at the same time, like, precious. And he just goes through so much in the series. I go through so much in the series with him. I love him. Like, every scene he was in, like, it was a highlight, you know? Like, I was always waiting for him to get back to the action, waiting to, like, get back to his POV. I just love him. He is an icon as well. Then is a book that made you cry. And I've only ever cried with 3 books in my life. And one of them was this year. Actually, one of them was this month. And that was Kingdom of Ash. And that's because the only character I really cared about, which I assume you can guess who it was, according to a previous answer, was suffering so much. Like, she went through something so traumatic, something so horrifying, and she was just suffering so much. And yeah, I did cry. A lot of characters went through a lot, but I didn't really care that much. But yeah, that scene, it absolutely broke me, and yeah, this book did make me cry. Next question is a book that made you happy. And honestly, this is a very hard question because I don't really tend to read happy books. Like, all of the books I read are kind of sad. There's always like people suffering, and the characters that I care about are always suffering. And actually, like, I was checking the list of books that I have read so far, and I couldn't really find like a very happy book. Because, I mean, I could go with a romance, because romances, like, they do tend to end up, like, in a happy way. But I don't like romance, and I don't care about romance. And when I'm reading it, I don't really, I mean, the only ones I read were, like, for that video. But when I'm reading it, I don't really care about the characters ending up together. I really just don't care. Like, in the book that I mentioned, I cared about the main character like being happy and ending up okay, but I didn't actually care about the romance. And also, that book was not happy. Definitely not happy. That book was really, really, really sad. But there was a book that I read earlier this week. I read it on Monday, and today is Saturday. And like, it was kind of heartwarming in a weird way, but it did give me like a heartwarming, comforting feeling. So I'm gonna go with that. And that was Dusk or Dark or Dawn or Day. And it was fantasy. And yeah, it was, I mean, it was sad. It definitely started off very sad. And it did have a sad undertone throughout the whole book, but also it did have a heartwarming feeling. So I'm gonna go with that. Next is the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. And actually, I haven't bought many books this year so far. I'm doing great. And the ones that I think are the prettiest, I actually don't have here with me. They're at my place, not here at my parents' place. But they are the Tawny Men trilogy. I think they're so pretty. But yeah, I don't have them with me. But they are fantasy. They are the like 3rd series in the Realm of the Elderlings world. And yeah, I do think they are the prettiest I've bought so far. And now the last question is, what books do you really need to read by the end of this year? And so, other than my anticipated releases that I haven't yet read, there is Leviathan Falls, which is like the last book in the Expanse series, which I also don't have here. It's also at my place. But I actually plan to read that this month, so that is a pretty safe answer. And then I also want to read the Tawny Man trilogy still this year. And I want to definitely continue and finish the Robert Hunter series, the one I mentioned that is a mystery thriller. And I also want to start, probably not going to finish it, but I do want to start the Akatar series. And that's probably enough books for me to commit to. And yeah, those were all the 13 questions that were in the mid-year book tag. And that is everything for this video. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have enjoyed it. And if you give it a like and subscribe, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!